Good afternoon. John Creedon, you're very welcome to the Mythical Ireland Library. I'm Anthony Murphy. This is ostensibly live Irish myths in conversation. This one is being recorded live for YouTube. John, it's a great pleasure to have you on the show.
Not at all. It's great to be here. At long last, I've become a myth.
John, the primary reasons, plural, that I have you on the show is, number one, your show on RTE is on at the moment. That's Creedon's Atlas of Ireland. And secondly, you have a book about place names. Before we get into that, tell us a little bit about your background, where you grew up, etc., and how that might have influenced your interest in Irish place names and folklore.
Yeah, sure, Anthony. Well, I grew up in the inner city in Cork. I'm number 10 of 12 children.
Wow.
Very busy household. There was my mother and father, 12 children. There were two aunts who lived with us. We had a shop out front, like a late night sweet shop and news agency. So our corner shop was open from 6 in the morning until 1 a.m. So it was a busy house. There was always a huge throughput of people. And on the side of the house, we managed to squeeze in a few bed sits. And living in there were just a whole variety of colourful people. My mother always never went for the simple thing, always went for the exotic. So we had Joey Connors, who was a little American guy. He was a writer for Time Life magazine. And he had a room there with us. He was like Mr. Magoo. He was a small little man with a little hat. All he was short was his press sticker. And we had Dr. Ngoriganda, who came from Kampala in Uganda, who wasn't a doctor at all. He was actually a med student in UCC, and this is back in the early 60s. So it was a colourful household. There was always loads of noise, loads of chat. Someone was asking me recently for a collective noun for Creedons, because there were about 7 of us in a pub together. This is last year. And I think my suggestion was a cacophony of Creedons, because we all talk at the same time. They say Puerto Ricans are the fastest Spanish speakers in the world. I'd say we give them a run for their money in the old Berla. So a busy household. My mom and dad, they were just, I have to say, I've said it before, life is a lottery. You don't get to pick your parents. But I certainly, my numbers came up there. My mom and dad, they were good people. They were gentle. They were interested. My father was a very funny storyteller. My mother was a very sensitive person. And so it was really traveling west to their home places, because they were both from West Cork, although from about 40 or 50 miles apart. My father from Inchigeela, which was a brack Gaeltacht, as he would call it, a speckled Gaeltacht, like Boreen brack being a barn brack, or bracca unlay, the speckling of day, or brack is a trout as well, as you probably know. So a brack Gaeltacht was a village where every second household was English or Irish speaking, whereas the place his father came from, up the lake, a place called Bela Hongrerig near Guggenbarra, that actually was Long Gaelic. So my father was a good Irish speaker, but they had the post office in the village, so they operated in English and in Irish. And he was a great old Scaly. But the place names around there and on the road back to my mother's place in Adrigole, she was from the Beara Peninsula, very wild and windswept, and I suppose appropriately named Cruha was where she grew up. It was up there near Hungry Hill, with just stunning views of Bantry Bay, the Atlantic, and the mountains back there. So on the way west, like, I could always feel the excitement mount in the car as we got closer. And as the further west we got, the greater it got. And the place names all around my mom and dad's place, like my father had Tiernas Bedoiga, would have been the next townland as you leave the village, and that's the land of the Robins. And then you have places like Powlanarrogate. That was a good bit. That was out the road a good bit. But like Powlanarrogate, the whole of the money, I presume somebody stashed money, hid it from the Vikings, because there was a Viking settlement actually in the area. It's upstream in the River Lee. And so the place names are full of colour. And I suppose one of my favourite, a lot of my favourite place names, because not only are they beautiful, but I suppose for me, they'll always bring my mom and dad back at some level, or just those gentle, kind, small farmers and their wives and the people I stayed with. It was just a beauty about the place and about the people and the place names.
I can appreciate your love of place names. I've long been interested in them, and it's been a sort of crucial area of my own research. And I love, we have a place in Drogheda called Yellow Batter, which is, a boher boy. It's
Exactly.
a bastardization. It's half of it is English and half of it is Irish. John, in your TV series, you've been following in the footsteps of John O'Donovan. Tell us a little bit about this remarkable man and why he inspires you so much.
Well, I think he'd love you with the yellow batter because Stony Batter, funnily enough, I often wondered about it. Stony Batter, what a great place name. Anyone should at least spend a year in the bedsit with a load of students in Stony Batter. You know what I mean? It's like it's brilliant, but it's the same thing. It's the Stony Road. It's the old Stony Road that came in from the north, I suppose. There are, yeah, if you're heading out Meath direction or something like that, I expect that was the old road into Dublin. But anyway, John O'Donovan, fascinating man. I only stumbled upon him really because of my own research into place names, because I'm not an academic, I'm not a professor of Irish or place names or history or mythology. I'm just a very excitable and enthusiastic amateur. And John O'Donovan, I have to say, I grew to love the man for loads of reasons. First and foremost, there was that major mapping of Ireland back in the 1830s, when the British decided we're going to map this place and we're going to map it good, and they did. We're probably the most mapped country on the planet. It's 6 inches to the mile. So in effect, from where I'm sitting to where you're sitting, is probably a couple of football pitches of maps, given how much they represented on those 6 inches to the mile maps. So they started the Grand Survey of Ireland, and they were a couple of years into it, and a man by the name of Larkham. I might be mistaken on this. I thought he might have been English, maybe not. But anyway, he was not an Irish speaker. I think he may have been a Protestant gentleman, but he decided he had an interest in Gaelic studies and so on and so forth, and he was taking Irish classes from John O'Donovan privately. So as a civil servant, he's above there in the Phoenix Park trying to collate all the information that's coming in. And he starts getting tired of it because he's getting all these different place names misspelt and so on and so forth. For example, a Royal Engineer, a sapper, may send back a report saying there are 2 bridges leading into the town of Dingel. And then somebody else would report there's 34 retailers in Dingle. And then somebody else would say, we stopped at the town of Dangan. And it's like, hang on a while, lads. What's the name? What's the name of the bleeding town, right? So he decided, if we're going to do this, we might as well do it right. And remember now the detail they were gathering. It wasn't just, they did 64,000 townlands. Every single townland in the country is logged. And unlike what happened at the Four Courts, with the shelling of the Four Courts, all these records still exist. The original handbooks are all there in the National Archives, 64,000 townlands. So what happened was they had logged and they had mapped the terrain. If it was boggy terrain, the elevation, the boundary walls, holy wells, monuments, crossroads, you name it, they logged everything. So there was no hiding place really from the British by the time this map was finished. They knew every back alley in the country. And it was for military reasons primarily, but also obviously for taxation and so on. So eventually Larkham said, lads, we're going to have to follow on. You keep going, keep mapping. We're going to follow on with a place name study. And he started, and within a few months, the man who began the place names actually died, collecting the place names. And he said, I'll give the gig to John O'Donovan, my good friend and Irish scholar. So John O'Donovan started collecting the place names. He, interestingly, was from Slievru, the beautiful name as well, the Red Mountain, probably from the bracken, or maybe, yeah, like the wilting furs or ferns, I expect, on the hillside there. And I've been there. It's in Kilkenny, just inside the Kilkenny border, not far from Waterford City. And the actual townland where he grew up, beautiful place name, I think. Attitimore. To me, I could almost hear an old bicycle, Attitimore. There's a beautiful rhythm to it, but it translates, or it's a transliteration from the original name, Oit on Timor, the place of the big house. And of course, poor old John O'Donovan was from a small house near the place of the big house. But so he came from there, and he followed on then with his group of merry place name gatherers, and they traipsed every ditch and field and bog in Ireland until they got them all. And not only did they get the name, they got you see, a lot of people are critical of John O'Donovan's work without actually checking out what he did. No, he didn't translate our beautiful place names to suit the Brits. No, he didn't. He was an Irish scholar himself and a classical scholar. What he did was he got the name as it was in common usage in the place, and quite often that was a transliteration from the Irish, because a lot of the Irish people had also lost their language. So he wrote down what was called, in my father's case, he wrote down Inchigila, Inchigila, Irish spelling, Inchigila, Agh, from Incha, meaning a peninsula or a spit, Guilach, meaning of the hostages. inquired locally. It seems there were Viking raids in this part of the river, or perhaps it is from Celtic times. Source, Mr. Murphy, and he didn't just go to the Reverend, or he didn't just go to the libraries or to official sources. He asked folks, he banged on doors. I'm sure a lot of them didn't fancy seeing him coming because they probably thought it was something to do with tax. And remember, these were in the years leading up to the famine, because he started, the survey was underway, so he kind of worked right up to the famine. So what he witnessed, and it shows in the work. He was a man of great humor as well. He loved a good old pun, you know. But between them, they gathered all 64,000, and not just the names, but the Irish names, translations, the roots of it, and any other connections or points of interest, the person who gave it to them, where it was, just really thorough work, and it's all there for us.
Yeah. I have to say that the Ordnance Survey letters have been very important to my own work and my own research. It's such a valuable insight. And as you say, pre-famine, going back to a time when, you know, most people were still native speakers, and when the place names had perhaps a greater resonance than they do today. John, I just want to mention your book, give it a plug anyway. I thoroughly enjoyed it, a very readable book, That Place We Call Home. And in your book, you lament the fact that young people today don't learn sort of poems and long texts and prayers the way that yourself and myself had to do in school, you know, years ago. Perhaps you write, perhaps the jump from Druid to Bard to book to Google isn't such a giant leap for mankind after all. We're not as good at remembering things like our forebears, are we?
No, it seems to have kind of died out, and I have to concede I'm one of those as well. You know, I store stuff in my phone. Maybe I don't take people's details. I certainly wouldn't remember a phone number, never anymore. But we come from a tradition of talkers, and I think the point I was trying to make there, and thanks for the kind words about the book, because to be frank about it, Anthony, it was my first book. I was anxious about it. I've written over the years comedy and TV scripts and blah, blah, blah. But the thought of slinging something that would run over 300 pages or something together, I thought.
Very enjoyable, very enjoyable.
Well, I'm glad you said that, because I was going to.
Yeah, I know it's not academic or anything like that. It's an introduction to the subject.
Yeah. It's like, I had to concede. It's a bit of a ramble, but I'm a bit of a ramble myself, so at least it's true to the source. But about the memorizing, I suppose, like a lot of people, I'm always making connections. You know what I mean? I'm out in Spain, and I remember watching a football match one day. There was an old man sitting on a milk crate in his, sleeveless T-shirt, an old geezer like I am now, looking at a portable TV, and it was like Barcelona versus Cordoba, and I haven't a clue, but I'm trying to follow it the best I can. But I notice, like, you Jugador, and then it goes on, trainador. Oh, the trainador, he must be the trainer, obviously, right? And the Jugador, as in the French word je, or the Spanish word, player. And then I'm thinking, Jugador, trainador, matador, toreador, picador. Door means it's your job. If you stick the word door at the end, that suffix on a Spanish word like that, it obviously means it's your job. And I was thinking, chopador, side door, show door. We must have got that from the Spanish. This idea of sticking DOR on the end of a trade, DOR on the end of an activity to suggest that it's your job. So I'm always kind of spotting those things as I go, and quiche, we've got that from the French, So I'm always curious about words and things. But what struck me was that so many things in my life seem to be connected. It's like I couldn't stand the rosary when I was a kid, and we had to say it down the country when I was staying. We didn't say it at home so much. But I've come to realize through my own wanderings through Buddhism and reading a bit of Taoism and this and that and the other, and transcendental meditation, that all it ever was meant to be was a meditation. It's meant to be boring. You're meant to go, and the rosary, you're not meant to be thinking really about the meaning of the sentence. And that's why people fly through it. And all it is, and the effect that the rosary had on me as a little boy, you can see how talkative I am, is that I kind of calmed down. And that is, and then you go and you pay for lessons in transcendental meditation. And so like that, I discovered that an awful lot of memorizing is not unique to Ireland or to my boyhood, but other cultures as well. And I've seen it in in places like, I remember in India, passing a Muslim school, and I could hear the boys and the girls chanting the Quran inside, off by heart, off by heart. Standing at the Wailing Wall in Jerusalem once upon a time, I snuck in the side door that I shouldn't have gone in really, and there were teachers and little boys, and they were memorizing the Torah like this, just learning it off by heart. And I kind of thought, God, how boring, how awful, you know. But what I've come to realize is that that's a muscle as well, and if you don't exercise it, you're letting it lie fallow. And in our tradition, the bardic tradition, become a bard even, to join the first rung of that ladder in that bardic tradition, you had to memorize so much prose, epic poems, and it was a real test, like to even get to the first level. So if you think about it, the point I make, I think, in that paragraph is, in the beginning was the word, and it was spoken. There was no writing down.
Yeah.
So you had to memorize your way from one place to another. There were no maps. You had to have it in your head, or else you were struggling. Equally, the story of us. I mean, where do we come from? Are we the same as horses? Or, so where's that information stored? There's no library. There's no book. How do we know? So some people were charged with knowing, with memorizing the story of us, memorizing things like genealogy. So, for example, you would say to the bard, or a bard would have an opinion on whether you and the other person were related, and whether you shouldn't be married or should be married or should have children. Or so there was a huge amount of information that actually had to be just plain old-fashioned memorized. And that was the task of the bards, and they were very highly regarded. They were right up there, second only to royalty.
Yes.
And unfortunately, as we have in Kilcash and other poems, that whole trade died out, and a lot of them. I often wonder about the surname Ward, because it is Macavard, son, or the offspring of the bard. And they did go rambling within I don't know how long, but maybe within 50 years, the flight of the Earls, and when their patrons were gone. What can you do with stuff in your head? Not a lot, really. So it's a bit like the sack of Europe. Here you had these educated people with huge amounts of information, and when there was big respect for them in the community anyway, there was no patronage. So some of them ended up working as farm labourers. Some of them took to the roads. Some of them would go to fairs and tell stories. And I often wonder about the name Ward. It's a great traveller name. And I often wonder if the Maca Wards, I'd say they're good singers and good storytellers, because my hunch is that may be part of their tradition. I don't know, that's for them to say really, but it just strikes me as a great name, Maca Ward, the offspring of the bard. But anyway, that whole tradition has kind of died out. But you and I did that, Anthony, in school, learning songs off by heart when you already had the book. It was good for you.
Yeah. And if it was good enough for your forebears, it was good enough for you, as the teacher said.
Yeah.
And I wonder whether that's why us Irish are so famed at being so loquacious and so ready to sing songs and tell stories.
I'm just thinking here, Anthony, I'm sure an awful lot of those teachers would probably have thought, that's the great thing about memorizing. It's easier to punch the information into a computer than it is to punch it into a student. But they punched it into us, that's for sure.
They certainly tried. John, we're currently in the midst of a few specifics from your book. We're currently in the midst of a pandemic. The meaning behind the name of Tala in Dublin is interesting in that regard, isn't it? Tala Wincher Parthalone.
Yeah, that's one I kind of stumbled upon, really. If you break it up, the meaning of the word Tala, Oscoelga, is Tav Lacht. Tav is a plague. Lacht, a bit like Lacandurish, is the saddle of a door or a flat stone. It's used quite a bit, I suppose, in your old kitchen. You would have a lack, which would be a fireplace even, like a flat stone. But equally, it was a flat stone you would put as to mark a grave. Not even to mark it, but just to ensure animals didn't dig it up. So a big flat stone was a very handy thing. And lack, that's what a lack is. And Tav means a plague or an epidemic or an illness that's infectious. And what happened was, the background to Tala is fascinating. I couldn't believe it. I had to check a couple of sources, and no one has actually come back to me and said, no, you're all wrong. People have come back to me and said, yeah, you're all right, which is very encouraging, because my parents always told me I wasn't all right. But anyway, Tavlocht. So what happened was, Partholon, and this is it now in ballpark, because as I said, I'm not a professor of mythology, history, or anything else. Partholon was a leader who came from Greece with his wife, his 3 sons, and his followers. They obviously were on the receiving end of some battle somewhere in Greece, but they settled in Sicily. So Sicily is where they came on from. But they were looking for a permanent home and a place to stay. And they arrived on the east coast of Ireland, and they settled roughly where Blanchardstown, Liffey Valley, that kind of zone is at the moment. So they settled in and around there. So there was Partholon, his wife, and three children, three boys. I think it was three children anyway. And there were about 1,000 followers. And this is given to us in the annals. So there were, was it 6 invasions of Ireland?
Yeah.
And these would have been the 3rd. So the arrivals of the people of Partholon, Winter Partholon, Partholon's folk, came here. And we don't have a precise year on it or anything like that, of course, but they settled quite happily for a couple of 100 years. And eventually a plague or an epidemic swept through the community. And I think it was 300 or maybe more died in the matter of days. And this is according to the annals. And they were buried in what is modern day Tala. And they were buried in a mass grave. And that pit was known as Tav Locht, or the grave of the epidemic. Something's never changed when you think about it. And so it became known as Tala, I suppose, anglicized or transliterated to Tala. And funny, in my research, I discovered that even Victorian historians noted that locally it was known as Talat Vic Fartlan. In other words, the plague grave of the people of Partholon. And that man and his clan gave rise to the name that's now in the phone book here, Partland, MacPartland, MacPartlin, and in Scotland, his descendants are known as MacFarlane, or MacFarlane, if
I
you will.
didn't know that. I didn't know that. Fascinating.
Amazing. Just one geezer from Sicily looking for a place to stop and contributed to all that, including that brilliant place named Tala. I drove past that a million times without ever stopping to think, where does Tala come from? And I mean, that's the joy of place names for me, and especially during the current pandemic and the lockdown, the amount of children here in Cork say who would be saying, Dad, why is it called Ballyfihan? Or Ma'am, why do they call it Grana Broher? You know? And to try and crack the code, usually it's 2 or 3 simple words, more than often than not, they're Gaelic words. Yeah. And that's why in the book, I included that glossary at the back where all the key words like Canuck, Slieve, Balya, and all those are in there, so people can crack the code, you know.
A very handy guide. In relation to Ireland, that's not the oldest name for the island. Éire, you were tracing some older names for the island of Ireland.
Yeah, I thought that was an obvious thing to do in ways because having done local place names and so on, I thought, what about Ireland itself? What does that mean? Where did that come from? And so it's had a long history, and like an awful lot of our place names, it disappears into the dim, distant past. And it would be hard to say who woke up what morning and called it what. But the earliest records we would have would be from people like Pytheas. Pytheas was a Greek businessman, really. And there was travel. People underestimate the old folks, but as you well know, and people who watch your work know, just because they didn't invent the car doesn't mean they were thick, you know, so they were traveling around. And Pytheas would have traveled up in the Mediterranean in search of tin, as I understand it. That's what he used to purchase in Devon, Cornwall, that part of the world. And interestingly, what I discovered there as well, that notion of the Islas Britannicas, the British Isles. We're always given out about London and about the British Isles and everything else. But the weird thing was, it was Mediterraneans referred to these 2 islands, these 2 big chunky ones up here, as Islas Britannicas, because there are some tribe of Britons live up there or something. They could have easily called them Islas Celticas or whatever, but that's where it began. So he was up there anyway, but he referred to the neighbouring island as Iron. And I wonder if the Iron Ballroom in Dublin got its name from that.
Probably.
Yeah, and then you had people, then Ptolemy, who mapped Ireland, and that was 140 AD approx. So you think about it, like, you know, Jesus had died on the cross, like, 100 years earlier, and here's a man mapping for the Romans Ireland, and did a very good job. A lot of people are familiar with that map. Ireland is a bit chubby, but 'tis there. But if you go right back, the Celtic name, as I understand it, for Ireland was Eriu, which loosely pronounced Eriu, and it was a Celtic goddess, and she was one of 3 sisters, Eriu, Banba, and Fola. And I think those names have popped up on the Irish Navy boats as well. So these 3 Celtic goddesses, Eirú was the abundant one, the pregnant one, the fertile one, the chubby one. That was the favoured name for Ireland at the time anyway. And there were times, of course, when you daren't speak the name of Ireland. So we came up with other names, but Banda and Fola, the other 2 sisters, their names would have been interchangeable with Eirú at times. And even during penal times, Roisin Dove, but it was always a woman. And that's how I see it as well. Whenever I look at the map of Ireland, especially when I'm abroad or something, and you come across a map of Ireland, I was saying in the book that I have a kind of a physiological reaction. I kind of think like I've spotted my mother's face in a crowd, but it's always my motherland. I never kind of see it as my fatherland, even though I love my father dearly and I love men as well. But for some reason, it's always Mama Ireland. And that's how the Celts saw it as well. And then it moved on. The Romans obviously called it Hibernia, meaning don't go here, it's wet and miserable. And and then it went. So in the current series, we picked it up really from 1916 and that remarkable proclamation. Like what a document. I still get that lump in the throat feeling when I read it. It's like, to proclaim that we are proclaiming ourselves an independent people where workers will be treated fairly, where women will be treated fairly, where all religions and none will be treated fairly. And then we produced a constitution where we enshrined, we guaranteed that we would protect all the children of the state. Now we failed, obviously. But the point is, that's the aspiration, that's the spirit, that's the claim. So we took it from 1916 and what Padraig Pearse read aloud and proclaimed outside the GPO. This is who we are. This is who we want. We want votes for women. We want workers' rights. We want fair play for everybody. This is our vision. And no kings or queens. We don't need them. We want one man, one vote, one woman, one vote, and we'll elect our own president. Thank you very much. And then it's about that whole decoupling to Saor Stát na hÉireann, where we still had a king and didn't have a president, and eventually to the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland. And as you know and I know, place names, some people refer to Northern Ireland as the 6 counties, and that has a certain feel to it. Other people refer to it as Ulster, and that has a different feel to it. Some people talk about the South or Southern Ireland. There is no such place, but some people prefer to call us Southern. So like all these names are charged, but to me, all they are really the name, whatever it becomes. If it becomes something different again, it's just a casing. The name is the label on, I feel, the spirit and the aspiration of 1916, which is love your neighbour as you love yourself, and we'll be grand. And so names will come and go.
Beautifully put, John. Thank you. In relation to place names, isn't it true that the landscape itself, I mean, if you go back far enough, and some of these place names are undoubtedly very ancient, you know that the landscape was the inspiration for many names like Knock, Loch, Carrig, Ban, Bian, Cluan, Dura, Glan, you know, so you have, the hill, lake, rock, head, meadow, Oakwood, Glen, etc., etc.
Yeah. They tell you an awful lot. And in fact, as you come through the years, I mean, I suppose if you go back to the very earliest, they're in languages that are now obsolete. So even scholars can't crack the code. They can't get in there and work out what they were trying to tell us. But even with the simple ones, the beautiful ones like Labashida, but we go right back to the earliest ones, like, Knockmore, Canuckmore. It does what it says on the tin. It's a big hill. And but as the Celts settled and as farmers, they didn't live in big conurbations, but as towns sprang up, then of course you move from the rock, lake, bog names into, I suppose, human-made features on the landscape, like Drogheda, the bridge of the ford, or Baile Átha Cliath. It tells you there's folks there, and Baile tells you that there's a community there. And in fact, speaking of community, some beautiful words like Grag, which means a tiny hamlet. It's a cluster of houses. So Graig na Manna tells you it was a cluster of buildings where the monks lived. Grag na Manna. So you're right. And in fact, interestingly, because I know, Anthony, in your own work, and indeed on Sunday's show, some of the work you did there, I know that looking at the place names, it was a case of, why didn't I think of it? The place name was telling me there's probably a monument here. Do you know what I mean? Canuck na Shee. the Hill of the Fairies. Well, there's a good chance now there's a heap of stones up there someplace,
And I think there are, but it's a funny one, isn't it? Because we were talking, I think, on the show about how prevalent words like wrath are in
Yeah,
Ireland. I mean, I live in the townland of Rathmullen, which is
right.
spelled similar to the Rathmullen in Donegal. And we don't know the origin of that name, but undoubtedly somewhere in this vicinity, there was at least one Rath associated with somebody called Mullen in the past. Fascinating stuff.
Yeah, but the funny one there now, because that's intriguing. It's a fairly simple place name in ways, Rathmullen, and there are a few of them, as you say. The one in Donegal I know pretty well, and I haven't investigated. But if you use your hunches, it's a good place to start. So you got your Rath, which is a fort, and probably a very old fort, rather than a dune, which is more of a castle fort. So a Rath, Mullen. There's certainly a Saint Mullen, because there's Saint Mullins down. There's a few of them. They're actually all the way. That name pops up. The Saints name pops up all the way from West Limerick all the way to Wexford and Carlow. So if it was in that area, you might say, well, was this a fort of Mullins people? There's the family name, O'Moylan, but even the name itself, even the family name, you've got the key word in there, Moyle, meaning bald. And now, because I know it pops up in mountain names as well, where there's very little vegetation. It's a big rock, and they might use the word moil there, meaning bald. But Rathmullen, it could, and remember that, as you know, that in those times, a lot of people who shaved the front of their heads, it meant that they were followers of, quite often warriors, but at least followers of. So, like Moel Downig would be Christian warriors, but Christian monks, people who are advocates for this cause. So Rathmullen is an interesting one. It could be the Moylan family or something, or it could be Saint Mullen, or it could be something even more groovy, like that there was a settlement here of warriors of one clan or one sept or another. I don't know, but that's one to check out.
You've gone into that much deeper than I had ever done myself. John, conscious of the fact that we've loads of questions to get through and we're pressed for time, I'll just push on a tiny bit.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm inclined to...
Animals, no, don't worry. It's all very enjoyable. Animals, very importantly. Mac Tíre, the wolf, which is extinct in Ireland. There are places called after Mac Tíre.
It's a beautiful term. First and foremost, it means wolf, as you say. But if you break it down again, it's Mach, meaning son. That can be used in the how would you put it, in a general term as well, as just meaning offspring of. Generally speaking, women wouldn't get the Mach. They'd be O or E, depending on. But it means descendants of. But it means son in general terms, and Tíre, of the land. So basically, Mac Tíre means son of the countryside, or the lad of the land, and that's what they were. These were animals that roamed the lands. But implicit in a name like that, I think, is an affection or a respect for this Mac Tíre. He's got a right to be here. He's the son of the land. Yeah. So Mac Tíre pops up, and variations thereof, like the word, funnily enough, Madra, we think nowadays as a domestic dog, but it was interchangeable with Mac Tíre for a wolf. And the Irish wolf was considerable. I didn't realize how big they were. I thought it might be the size of a big German Shepherd. They were huge. Like, they were big, and like the Irish wolfhound was bred to tackle them. But they were a big, considerable animal. And so Madra pops up as well. There are other variations on Mac Tíre, but like Limavady, funny enough, is Lema Wadra, the leap of the dog. But in this case, it's a wolf. I'm not sure what the folklore is behind it. But Limavady, there's quite a few of them around. So they pop up, names like Turk, meaning, or Tark, meaning a wild boar. We don't have them anymore. The Canturk is Kjaun Turk. Kjaun, not necessarily the boar's head. Kjaun quite often is, it might be in this case, but quite often Kjaun is like the entrance to, or the head of a fort, or Kjaun Shabale, it's the entrance to. So Canturk actually takes its name from the wild boar. That appears on a crest, a family crest there. You've got animals like Nad on Iller. That's near here. That's only about 20 miles from here. We call it Nad for short, but it means the nest of the eagle, Nad on Iller. And all those animals were extinct. Now the eagle is making a comeback, but they survived, if only in our place names. And that, to me, that's how important the place names are, because they are a record. of
Yeah.
who lived here and what lived here. So yeah, there's some beautiful animal names.
It reminds me in the Cooley Mountains, we have Carnawaddy, which is the cairn of the dog, but I wonder how far back that goes. Tell us a little very quickly about the story of the Devil's Bit in Tipperary, which I find fascinating. How does that connect with Cashel?
Well, that's the catch, is it doesn't. I always assumed it did. I always thought that wouldn't Cashel just fit neatly into the Devil's Bit? And there are old stories and mythology and folklore about the about that stone being cast onto the plains of Tipperary, those fertile plains of Tipperary, the Golden Vale. I mean, what would you want doing, throwing a big old rock onto beautiful pasture land like that? But anyway, I've since discovered that people who know better than me, scientists, have actually got in there and tested the rock in the mountain where the Devil's Bit is. And the lump of, I'm not sure which is which now, but I think it might, anyway, one of them is limestone. And while it would fit perfectly like a molar into the mountains, no, the Rock of Cashel and the Devil's Bit are two separate entities entirely. My hunch is that the Rock of Cashel, again, I don't know, I'm only bluffing, but would be, I feel, a glacial deposit. How could you have an old lump of rock like that in the middle of nowhere? Only the glacier got tired and dropped it, I expect.
The old storytellers are very good at inventing sort of origins. I mean, the same thing about Lough Neagh being scooped up by Fionn McCool and being thrown out into the Irish Sea as the Isle of Man.
But that's all true.
It's one we learned. Oh, it's true, is it? Oh, sorry, I apologize.
I'm only messing.
John, the Vikings also left their mark, didn't they?
Love them.
They put S in front of Stjach, in front of Chach, which I found fascinating. There's a townland in Louth called Stifians. It's anglicised, of course. I was like, what does that mean? Apparently, it's anglicised from Stjach Fian, the house of the Fianna.
Get away.
Yeah, I know. Fascinating stuff. It's a townland up, I think, in the middle of the county near Dunleer, Stifians. And if you look at it, you think that is so not resonant with anything that's on a map in Ireland. And yet, there you have it, Stjach Fian. But you talked about the likes of Helvick Head, for instance, Longford, Skerries, Carlingford, etc. We've got so many diverse sources for our place names, haven't we?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't fancy meeting one, but I love the Vikings, and certainly in terms of place names, for a couple of reasons. First and foremost, if you just listen to the place name, it's a bit like a monk listening in a round tower for just a snap of a twig. When you hear Helvick, you think, that doesn't sound like Irish. That's a bit Scandinavian, for me. And so you can actually hear the sound of Viking or Norse, Old Norse words in some of our place names. And interestingly, they weren't colonizers like those who followed them. Even the Normans were fairly laid back by comparison. They married in, they took on some of our habits. Without them, we wouldn't have Blarney Castle, and we wouldn't have names like Fitz, and Cork is full of them. The Barrys and the Roaches, sure, they were all half French, don't you know, Normans. But anyway, the Vikings, however, brilliant. They weren't interested in they were interested in raiding, really, kind of smash and grab raids. So when they came down the Irish Sea, they would have named places that they didn't know or they didn't know the name of. Obviously, when they pulled up here, they asked some young fella, what's the name of this town? Cork, grand. It's called Cork, lads. Let's rob it. So they didn't change place names. They didn't try to supplant our culture with theirs. Excuse me. They weren't interested. They were only interested in robbing and clearing off again. So they didn't really colonize us like that. So where they did put their place names were nearly all places where they didn't have an existing name. So they named it themselves. So, excuse me. So coming down the Irish Sea, anything with EY at the end, more often than not, was Old Norse for an island. So Lambay is Lamb Island. Dursey Island near Cork here is Bull Island. Ireland's Eye, that's an EY as well. We call it Ireland's Eye, but it was for them Ireland's Island. So when you hit that one, take a sharp right up the Liffey, rob all around you. And as they went up further upstream, as they went, and of course, I also discovered on a previous series about 10 years ago why they started Dublin and Christchurch, because it was where the Poddle enters the Liffey. So the Liffey water was brackish up as far as there. But once they hit that trickle of fresh water coming in, they knew we built a camp here on Wood Quay, literally, and we've got sweet water. We can stock up with fish. There's probably a few monasteries around. We'll have a rummage. But as they went further up the Liffey, they created what they called leekslip, lachchalup, which is Old Norse for salmon leap. And to this day, the Irish translation for leekslip, Lame of Rodoin, the leap of the salmon,
Wow.
actually makes sense. Whereas the English transliteration of leekslip means nothing. But it's in Old Norse, it was created as lachchalup, meaning salmon weir. And in Oscoelga, it's called, to this day, Lame of Rodoin, the leap of the salmon. And so they named a few places like that as they went, but it was only where we didn't already have names. But a lot of their words entered or the Irish language, some of them independently of English. So there's a lot of them. Like, for example, here's one I discovered when I was in Shetland doing another TV thing years ago. I asked the historian, why is the main town called Lerwick? Because I found the culture there very Norse. There was no bagpipes. There was no Rangers Celtic carry-on. It is part of Britain. It is the most northerly post office in Great Britain up there, and they do speak English, and they are ruled by London. But the culture, it was all hardanger fiddle. And I asked your man, what did Lerwick mean? And he said it's Old Norse. Ler means like clear. It's like when mud settles or sand settles. And wick means a bay. So Lerwick. So I went, oh, right, as in Berwick and Tweed. He said, exactly. And then I've since found similar ones here, like Smerwick Harbour. Smir was an old Viking word for butter. And even though we would assume if it's in West Kerry, surely it's Gaelic. Apparently not. Apparently it was a spot where Vikings would buy or rob or, buy probably, trade for butter. Smir. So we get the word smear. So, it's like, it's a bit like back to my Toreador Matador thing. There's only all tiny little jumps from one culture to the next, I think anyway, yeah.
It is a fascinating exploration. That's very interesting about Leekslip, Layman Radon. In the next couple of days, I'm hoping to receive from the printer my new book called Return to Segish, which is primarily inspired by the story of the Salmon of Knowledge. John, just to finish, can I ask you, do you have a favorite place name? Or is there one that you find particularly funny?
I suppose there's loads of funny ones, and even some of the minor ones. Like I came across a Doodie's Bottoms recently, right? Because a lot of fields, all our fields had names. It was only really with the plantations that the planters eroded, like Donovan's Meadow, gone, Field A. Take the names off them, because otherwise in 200 years' time, they'll be trying to claim, the Gaelic crowd will be trying to claim this land back off my son or whatever. So, but Doodie's Bottoms. Bottoms is not unusual really for a field. It means where a field meets a stream. That's been known as the bottoms. But I came across a Doodie's Bottoms. It sounded like a pair of long johns to me. I passed a blanket nuke in Donegal recently. Wexford, you can go rummaging yourself because there's a few Rudies in there. There's a lot of very funny names in Wexford. Here in Cork, we've got New Two-Pot House. There's a lot of oddball ones like that. New Two-Pot House, I believe, is connected to the fact that there was a tavern on the crossroads there. And it wasn't, I thought it was a two-pot chimney or something, but no, it's a pot was like, I think, like represented beer. But I suppose favorite ones, a lot of them, I suppose, is the sound of them, the sound of place names. And I just found that my mom and dad's territory was just full of beautiful sounding names. Like I'd hear my father talking to my Uncle John or to my mom about people, like his old friend, oh Jesus, Jack Sean Rua. He was over in Came Corabula during the week. And I'm going, Came Corabula? God, that's in Hawaii, is it? No, it's
Step, is it?
Came as a step or away. Yeah, so Came, Corra, as in the Corra of Kildare, soft grassland, quite often wet grassland, but suitable for cattle. And Bula or Bulteens would be cattle sheds. So Came Corabula. It sounds beautiful, lovely undulating name, but I suppose what it describes or what it paints is cattle taking their path back to the cattle houses across the pasture, which just sounds so pastoral. I just think it's a beautiful place. He also had nearby Camanee, which was the leap of the deer. And that really is a ravine that you go through on the road to Bantry. There's a cliff on one side, cliff on the other side. And I remember my father saying to me, do you know what that's about? And I said, no. He said, Camanee, the leap of the deer. Long ago, there was a big red stag and he was being chased by the redcoats. And Jesus, when he got to the cliff, he backed up. He had no choice. He backed up and he made one leap. and he managed to clear from that cliff across the road to the other cliff. And forever, this place is known as Taimini, the leap of the deer.
Brilliant.
And I was thinking, like, wow. So that's the food for a child's imagination that's in place names.
Absolutely.
And the place is just full of them, just full of them.
Yeah, we have one here in County Louth that I should mention. It's a Hackballs Cross.
Really? Right.
It sounds like a painful place to live, to be honest.
It sounds like a Cromwellian punishment to me.
John, tell us a little bit about your book. Where can people get your book? And is it possible to get a signed copy from you, or is it just order online? Or
unfortunately, because of the pandemic, it's not. And I just feel so, what's the word for it? Conceited. Even my book, it just feels so. It still feels very strange to me. But at the time, I thought, God, book signings, author John Creedon. But what they did was they sent me on 1,000. I was warned, just put John Creedon on it and send them back to us. And I thought, you can't just put John Creedon. So I put down something like Mila Buichas or something, and the date or something.
Yeah.
It took me days. I still haven't recovered. Right? So I know they went out in the first print, and there's been a few print runs. So there's not really, but I know it's available online, I suppose, from local bookshops in terms of click and collect. That's the hard copy there, I think you had, and it's just come out in paperback actually this weekend.
Okay, right.
But you see, there's a logic to it. The idea with the paperback is because there's a glossary in it, and because there's a journal at the back where you can log your own favorite place names as you go. And now with the 5K lockdown, everybody seems to be asking the question, God, why is that called Murphy's Lane? Or
Brilliant.
So I think, dare I say it, it's very timely. So with the paperback, the idea is you can throw it in the glove box of your camper van if you're lucky enough, or your car, so that if and when we get to staycation again, okay, there's the reading in it, there's a kind of a saunter through the place names of Ireland, but then you've got your glossary stroke dictionary plus your own space to log names that maybe in 2 centuries time your offspring or somebody will take off a shelf and go, oh look, Murphy's Lane, somebody won the lotto back in the second millennium, or something like that.
Brilliant. Well, you should be very proud of it, and it's a wonderful introduction to the whole area, and they're very written, obviously, from the point of view of somebody who's extremely enthusiastic, as we've been able to see. John, I've only been able to ask you about half the questions that I wanted to. Perhaps we'll come back and have another second part of the conversation at some time in the future. In the meantime, I look forward to watching the remaining episode in Creedon's Atlas of Ireland. I hope that comes back again. It's been a brilliant program, and thank you for joining us today, because I know that you're under pressure for time, but it's been a wonderful pleasure to talk to you.
Yes, it's been a great opportunity, Anthony. And if Creedon's Atlas doesn't come back, can I go on your show? Because you definitely have a TV series in you. I said that to you on the day in Fairy House. You have a great way of putting across what can be a very dry subject at times, and so too can place names. But I just found that day with you genuinely very interesting, and the fact that it was linked into the place name, they'll see on Sunday at 6:30 anyway.
Exactly. But I would be absolutely honoured to have you on any show that I might do in the future. It would be my pleasure and my honour to do so. John Creedon, thank you for joining us, and good luck with it all. I hope your book sells out many times over.
Thanks a million. And the next time, I promise you won't have to kind of cut me back so much. But see, I don't have a pause button. I'm a Creedon. That's the problem. There's no full stops, no commas in that book, nothing. You just all the way through.
You must have kissed the Blarney Stone.